Good morning. We will pay attention to the periodic inventory system and when we record entries in the general journal. Artistores is a gift shop and sells goods on credit. They use the periodic inventory system and maintains a profit of 25% on sales price. The balances at the beginning of the financial year is provided. Debtors, inventory and bank are all assets, and all these balances will be recorded on the debit side of the account. Creditors control is a liability, and the balance will be recorded on the credit side of the creditors control account. Credit sales for the year amounted to 102,000. We sell goods on credit to debtors. The debtors is an asset. Assets increase on the debit side because they owe us more money. Sales is credited to increase the income on the credit side. No entry is recorded for cost of sales or inventory because the periodic inventory system is used. A debtor returned inventory with a selling price of 5,000 as it has been damaged while being transported. On investigation, it was discovered that the item was of inferior quality. Ati Traders returned the goods to its supplier and received a credit note. You first have to complete an entry for the returns from the debtor to indicate that the debtor owes less money and that your income will reduce because these goods are not sold anymore. Then you will do an additional entry to return the goods to the creditor and show that the business owes less money to the creditor. Remember that when the goods are returned to the creditor, you have to calculate the cost price of the goods because you will receive the money back at cost price from the supplier. When the goods are returned, the debtor's allowances is debited to reduce the sales that we had in the previous entry. Debtor's control is credited to reduce the amount that the debtors owe. No entry will be recorded for cost of sales or inventory because we don't use it in the periodic inventory system. Then we have to calculate what is the cost price of this inventory so that we can determine what is the amount that we can claim back from the creditors. Before we do this entry, we will first do the calculation. A profit of 25% on sales price was made, so that means the sales price equals 100%. Because it's on sales price, the profit equals 25% and the cost price will then equal 75%. The sales price equals the amount that was returned, 5,000 Rand. If you want to calculate the cost price, the one that you want, 75, divide by the one that you know, 100 times 5,000. The creditors control will be debited to reduce the liability with 3,750. Creditors allowances is credited because we are using the periodic inventory system. You are not allowed to record any entries in your inventory account. Creditors allowances will reduce the purchases amount. So when we buy goods, we debit purchases. And when we return goods to the creditors, it will reduce via the creditors' allowances account. Receipts were issued for 85,500 for money received from debtors after 5% discount was allowed. So the debt is not given, the amount received is given because a receipt is issued as proof of payment of the amount that you received. We will have to work out what is the discount before we can record the entry. The total debt is 100%. discount received is 5%, the amount received is 95%. The amount received was given as 85,500. If we want to calculate the discount, the percentage that we want, 5, divided by the percentage that we know, 95, times the 85,500, and that will give us 4,500 Rand discount. If we want to calculate the total debt, the percentage that we want is 100% of the debt divided by the 95% that was given, and that will give us 90,000 Rand. The bank account is debited with 85,500 to increase the asset with the money paid into the bank. Discount allowed is debited with 4,500 to increase the expense for the business. Debtors control is credited with 9,000 to reduce the debt of the debtors because they owe less money. Cash purchases amounted to 50,000 Rand and credit purchases to 45,000 Rand during the year. The purchases account is debited with the total amount to increase the expense. You are not allowed to write in the inventory account, so you have to record the purchases in the purchases account, that is expense that will decrease equity. Bank is credited with the 50,000 that was paid for cash purchases. Creditors control is credited with 45,000 for the purchases purchased on credit. Creditors were paid after 10% discount was received. They don't tell us the debt or the discount or the amount that was paid, so we will have to go and calculate this in our creditors control account. First of all, they gave the balance of the creditors at the beginning of the year as 12,000 Rand. Then we returned goods to the creditors when we received the goods back from the debtor, so we have to record that. And there were credit purchases of 45,000 Rand. The outstanding amount of creditors at the end of the year is 18,000. We will have to work out by balancing what is the total amount that was paid and discount that was received from creditors in your creditors control account. The opening balance will be taken into account. The goods returned will be taken into account. The credit purchases and the outstanding debt at the end of the year. The opening balance was 12,000 Rand. We reduced this debt with 3,750 when we returned goods. The purchases during the year on credit increased the debt with 45,000. The outstanding balance at the end of the year that will be carried forward to the next financial year is 18,000 Rand. If we add up the credit side, we get a total of 57,000 minus the 3,750 minus the 18,000. So by balancing the creditors control account, we can determine what is the amount that will be recorded on the debit side of creditors control for the bank amount and discount received. We will have to make a split for this 35,250 to determine how much money was paid and what was the discount received. The total debt is 100%, the discount is 10%, the payment is 90%. We calculated the balancing figure as 35,250, so that is the total amount with which the debt was reduced. It includes the discount. If we want to calculate the discount, the 35,250 times the 10% that we want to know, divide by 100%, and that will give us 3525. the payment will be 90% of the total amount, and we will calculate that as 31,725. The creditors' control will reduce with the total amount. The bank will be credited with the amount that was paid, and discount received will be credited to increase the income with 3525. The owner took goods with a cost price of 800 for his own use. When the owner takes goods for himself, he always takes it at cost price. Drawings will be debited with the 800 rand. Purchases will be credited to reduce the expense, because when we bought the goods, we increased the expense for purchases on the debit side. When goods are used for another purpose and not for selling, it means that you have to decrease the expense for purchases. So you will create another expense or drawings, and you will decrease the purchases on the credit side. All the entries that is recorded in the general journal will be posted to the general ledger on exactly the same side as you recorded it in the journal. So if an entry is recorded on the debit side of the journal, you will record it in your ledger account on the debit side. If the purchases is recorded on the credit side, it will be recorded in your general ledger on the credit side. Debtors control, they gave us the balance. Debtors is an asset. Assets always increase on the debit side and decrease on the credit side. The balance of an asset is always on the debit side. So we will start the account with a debit balance of 4,300. When we sold goods to the debtors, we increased the debts of the debtors with the sales amount. So we have to debit the debtors control to indicate that the outstanding amount increased. We will credit the sales account to indicate that the income increased. When we want to reduce the outstanding amount of debtors, we have to reduce it on the credit side. If there are debtors allowances, it will be recorded on the credit side. And if you receive money from the debtors and you allow discount, you will record it on the credit side. We will calculate the balance at the end of the year. Because debtors is an asset, it will always have a debit balance. So we will first add up the debit side, get a total of 106,300 minus the 5,000 minus the 90,000. So by balancing, we calculate that the difference between the debit side and the credit side is 11,900. If we add this balance above the total and we add up all the figures on the credit side, you will now get the same total as you had on the debit side. This balance is brought down on the debit side of your debtors control account on the opposite side, and this will indicate at the beginning of the next financial year that the outstanding debt of debtors is 11,300. The bank had a debit balance of 30,000. If we receive money from the debtors, we will put it in the bank. Bank increases on the debit side, decreases on the credit side. So the 85,500 will be debited in the bank account. All payments, when money was taken out of the bank, will reduce the amount of money in the bank and will be recorded on the credit side. If we add up the debit side of the bank, the total is 115,500 minus the 50,000 minus the 31,725. And the balancing figure between the debit and credit side is then 33,775. If we add this balance above the total and we add up all the amounts on the credit side, we will get the same total as we had on the debit side. The balance will be brought down on the opposite side so that the next financial year will start with a balance of 33,775 in the bank account. In the periodic system, we will use a creditor's allowances account that is not used in the perpetual inventory system. If we return goods in the perpetual inventory system, we will credit inventory. Because we don't use our inventory account, we have to create an additional account where we can show that the purchases was decreased with 3,750. When we buy goods, we are not allowed to put it in the inventory account, so we open an expense for purchases and record purchases on the debit side. This purchases is an expense for the business and it will decrease equity. All the amounts that recorded on the debit side of your purchases account is goods that you purchase with the purpose of selling in the future to make a profit. If some of these goods are used for another purpose, for instance, for stationing the business, for promotion purposes, the owner takes it for its own use, you have to reduce these purchases to show that the expense for purchases decreased. Creditors' allowances will decrease the purchases amount at the end of the financial year because we will transfer the creditors' allowances to the credit side of purchases at the end of the year. So the creditors' allowances is actually the negative part of the purchases account. Discount received will be credited because it's an income. You have to record that it will be the debit entry in the creditors control account. Don't write bank because this amount is not included in the bank figure. Discount received is an expense and will be recorded on the debit side. The account that will be credited will be debtors control and not bank. So if you write the wrong word in these two accounts, you will not get marks for it because you have to indicate where is your double entry for this discount received or discount allowed.